By the summer of 1943, the Pacific War had entered a brutal new phase. The once unstoppable Imperial Japanese Empire was beginning to lose its vast territorial grip. From the jungles of New Guinea to the atolls of the Central Pacific, the tide had started to turn, slowly but decisively, against Tokyo. Yet in Japan's military command rooms, confidence still reigned. Many senior officers of the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service and the Navy's Air Arm dismissed the possibility that the Americans could ever strike the home islands directly. Japan, they believed, was simply too far, too well defended, too resilient. The Pacific, after all, was their shield. 6,000 kilometers of open ocean that no bomber in existence could cross, strike, and return. Even if U.S. aircraft carriers approached, they could be repelled by the Empire's island fortresses. Japan's commanders had seen the B-29 Flying Fortress in action over Europe. A capable bomber, yes, but with limited reach. When intelligence reports began to speak of a new, super bomber under development by the Americans, skepticism was the natural response. The reports described an aircraft unlike anything before. 4 engines, a pressurized cabin, remote-controlled gun turrets, and an operating ceiling beyond the reach of most fighters. It could fly at 30,000 feet, at speeds over 350 miles per hour, and carry nearly 20,000 pounds of bombs over thousands of miles. It was codenamed the B-29 Superfortress, an evolution of the flying fortress that had ravaged Germany's industrial heart. But to the Japanese military establishment, this was fantasy. Their analysts insisted that no piston-engine bomber could sustain such range without catastrophic mechanical failure. Their intelligence units, lacking access to American industrial production data, assumed the B-29 was a rare prototype, expensive, impractical, and too few to matter. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, American industry was proving them wrong at a speed unmatched in history. Under Boeing's leadership, supported by Bell and Martin, the B-29 program consumed over $3 billion, making it the most expensive weapons project of World War II, second only to the Manhattan Project. At its height, more than 60,000 workers toiled in massive plants from Wichita to Marietta, Georgia. By mid-1943, the first operational groups were forming under the newly created XX Bomber Command. The aircraft's enormous range, however, posed an operational dilemma. There was no American base within striking distance of Japan. Not yet. The Marianas were still in Japanese hands, and China's airfields were primitive, their supply lines perilously long. General Henry Hap Arnold, chief of the U.S. Army Air Forces, faced the challenge head-on. He envisioned a bomber force that could operate from bases in Chengdu, China, supported by logistics flights over the Himalayas, a route the airmen would call the hump. Each gallon of fuel, each bomb, would have to be flown in across 500 miles of mountains from India, one transport load at a time. It was a logistical nightmare. But it was the only way to bring the war to Japan's doorstep. Back in Tokyo, however, the Imperial General Headquarters read these reports and laughed. An American air campaign from China seemed absurd, an effort doomed by distance and weather. Japanese officers believed that even if the B-29s reached Japan, their advanced altitude would limit bomb accuracy, and their immense size would make them easy targets. Big targets burn faster, one officer remarked during an internal briefing. In the meantime, Japan was tightening its grip on its citizens. Industrial production was faltering, but the military kept the illusion of control. The home front remained confident, unshaken by the idea that the war might soon come to them from the sky. But far to the west, in the skies over India, a revolution in air power was quietly taking shape. The first squadrons of B-29s were arriving in theater, their crews training relentlessly for what was to come. Mechanics fought heat and dust, to keep the complex Wright R-3350 engines alive. Pilots learned to handle the aircraft's immense weight and high-altitude behavior. It was an experimental force, untested and imperfect, but it was growing. And soon, the Japanese mainland, still wrapped in a sense of invincibility, would hear the drone of engines they once called impossible. Because by late 1944, the Superfortress would finally take flight, not from China's crumbling airfields, but from a new chain of captured islands in the Pacific. By the spring of 1944, the B-29 Superfortress was ready for combat, at least on paper. In reality, the program remained fragile. The aircraft's engines overheated, its systems failed under tropical conditions, and maintenance crews struggled with a machine far ahead of its time. Yet despite all this, the Americans pressed on. Their first campaign, Operation Matterhorn, would strike Japan from airfields built around Chengdu, China, supplied through the perilous hump route from India. Each B-29 mission demanded 6 flights of fuel and ammunition before a single bomber could take off. It was a logistical chain stretched to the breaking point, sustained only by determination and the relentless drive to hit Japan where it hurt. On June 15, 1944, that moment arrived. 98 B-29s lifted off from Chinese bases, targeting the Yawata steelworks on Kyushu, Japan's first direct taste of American strategic bombing. The raid was largely ineffective. Heavy clouds and mechanical issues forced many aircraft to turn back. Only a fraction reached the target, and damage was minimal. But the psychological impact was profound. For the first time since the war began, Japanese civilians witnessed American bombers over their own homeland. Searchlights pierced the night sky over Kyushu. Anti-aircraft batteries roared in confusion. The shock spread quickly through the population. And through the High Command, Tokyo, Itilfadikur Frentitator Sen. Intelligence services scrambled to assess the new threat. Reports poured in describing bombers flying higher and faster than any interceptor could reach. The Imperial Japanese Army Air Force deployed its Kai-45 and Kai-61 fighters. But even when they reached the bombers' altitude, they struggled to hit the pressurized, heavily armed superfortresses. The high-altitude air made engines sputter, guns freeze, and pilots dizzy. Still, Japan's commanders remained defiant. They dismissed the raids as isolated stunts, long-range nuisances, not sustained warfare. They knew the Americans could not maintain such flights from China indefinitely. Their supply lines were too long, their bases too exposed, and, for a time, that was true. Matterhorn's early missions suffered catastrophic attrition. Weather, engine fires, and poor accuracy plagued the campaign. The B-29s were magnificent machines, but they were also temperamental. And the High Command in Washington soon realized the China bases were a strategic dead end. Then came a breakthrough, one that would change the air war entirely. In June and July of 1944, U.S. Marines captured Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, the Mariana Islands. For the first time, the U.S. had airfields just 2,500 miles from Tokyo, well within range of the B-29. From these volcanic islands, America could now launch a sustained campaign against the Japanese mainland without the logistical nightmare of China. Within months, entire cities of Quonset huts, hangars, and runways appeared across the Marianas. The 73rd, 313th, and 314th Bomb Wings of the Vanish Bomber Command began operations from Saipan and Guam by November 1944. The first raids from the Marianas began on November 24, 1944, targeting Tokyo itself. 111 B-29s, led by Brigadier General Emmett Rosie O'Donnell, roared toward the Japanese capital at over 30,000 feet. Their target, the Nakajima Aircraft Engine Factory, the heart of Japan's military aviation production. The results were again limited. Strong jet stream winds scattered the bombs, and Japanese anti-aircraft fire filled the sky with shrapnel. Yet, Tokyo had seen the future. The superfortresses came not as isolated intruders, but as fleets. They flew in tight formations, too high for effective interception, too fast for conventional defense. And they carried not only bombs, but the industrial weight of a nation that could build 4 new B-29s every day. As the raids continued, Japan's air defenses strained to adapt. Radar operators grew frantic, their screens lighting up night after night. Civil defense authorities drilled citizens on evacuation routes, but no city could truly prepare for what was coming. The Americans soon realized precision bombing over Japan was nearly impossible. High winds, up to 200 miles per hour, pushed their bombs off course. Cloud cover often hid the targets entirely. What began as daylight, high-altitude precision raids turned into a costly experiment in frustration. And so, in early 1945, the mission changed. A new commander, Major General Curtis E. LeMay, took charge of Dauntless Bomber Command. LeMay had studied the failures of precision bombing. He knew Japan's wooden cities burned easily, and its dispersed industries could not be crippled by single factory strikes. His conclusion was cold but practical. To end the war, Japan's cities themselves had to be destroyed. He ordered a new campaign, low altitude, nighttime, mass firebombing. The Japanese command, unaware of what was about to unfold, still believed their air defense network could withstand anything, but the B-29 was no longer just a bomber. It was about to become a weapon of fire. The B-29 Superfortress represented a leap so vast in aviation technology that even experienced engineers struggled to grasp its complexity. It was not merely an aircraft. It was a flying system, a convergence of engineering breakthroughs that redefined strategic warfare. The technological angle. A fortress above the clouds, every inch of the B-29 told a story of ambition. Its pressurized cabin allowed crews to fly higher than any other bomber of the war. Up to 31,000 feet, where thin air reduced drag and enemy fire faded into the distance. The aircraft was divided into 2 pressure zones connected by a narrow tunnel, letting gunners and flight engineers move between compartments while maintaining altitude comfort. At that height, the world below appeared as a quilt of clouds and blue haze, a distance both physical and psychological. Crews spent 15-hour missions isolated in a metal cocoon, surrounded by the hum of 4 Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone engines, 2,200 horsepower each. These engines gave the B-29 the power to carry immense bomb loads, but they also made the aircraft notoriously temperamental. Overheating, oil fires, and mechanical failures were common, especially in tropical climates. Despite its flaws, the Superfortress was armed like no bomber before it. It featured 5 remotely controlled gun turrets, each directed by analog computers that could calculate lead and range automatically. Gunners operated from inside the pressurized fuselage, aiming through periscopic sights linked to the General Electric Central Fire Control System. A single gunner could control multiple turrets, while the tail gunner had his own independent system. For Japanese pilots used to attacking vulnerable, lightly armed bombers like the B-24, the B-29 was a nightmare. Its defensive firepower was lethal. Dozens of Japanese fighters fell to the coordinated bursts of 50-caliber machine guns long before they could close the distance. But the aircraft's greatest weapon was not its guns. It was its range, over 3,000 miles. That meant it could reach Japan from bases the enemy never imagined were within striking distance. It rendered the Pacific's vastness meaningless. For Japan's military planners, this defied logic. Their pre-war doctrines assumed geography itself would be their strongest defense. that no enemy could project force across oceans on such a scale. The B-29 shattered that belief. Yet at first, Japan's intelligence services couldn't see it clearly. The intelligence angle, misjudgment and denial, Japan's military intelligence underestimated the B-29 from the moment they learned of its existence, captured Allied documents and intercepted communications, described the bomber's specifications, but analysts dismissed them as propaganda. No aircraft of such size could fly that high or that far, one intelligence officer later recalled. Even when the first B-29s appeared over Kyushu in mid-1944, many within the command structure assumed they were modified B-24s or experimental test aircraft. Reports of high-altitude raids were met with skepticism. How could piston engines operate efficiently above 30,000 feet? How could pressurized cabins resist decompression at those altitudes? The Imperial Japanese Army Air Force had little capacity to verify such claims. Radar coverage across the home islands was limited, often producing unreliable altitude readings. Fighter control coordination was weak, and many pilots lacked oxygen systems capable of sustaining combat above 25,000 feet. Early intercept attempts exposed these weaknesses brutally. Pilots of the Kai-44, Tojo, and Kai-61 Tony fighters reported that their guns froze, their engines sputtered, and their oxygen masks iced over long before they reached the B-29's altitude. Those who managed to attack found themselves facing accurate, concentrated defensive fire. The results were catastrophic. By late 1944, Japanese fighter losses against the B-29s had climbed sharply, while American losses remained low. Yet Tokyo continued to underestimate the scale of what was coming. Commanders convinced themselves that American air raids were temporary harassment, not the opening act of a systematic campaign to erase Japan's cities. Part of this misjudgment stemmed from information, isolation, censorship. Within the military meant bad news rarely reached the top. Local defense units downplayed their failures to avoid reprimand. When reports did reach Imperial headquarters, they were filtered through optimistic summaries, the illusion of control, preserved at any cost. Even Emperor Hirohito was told little about the growing destruction of provincial cities in late 1914. The time accurate assessments reached Tokyo. It was already too late. The Americans had seized the Marianas, and from there, the full might of the Superfortress could now be unleashed without restraint. What Japan perceived as an impossible threat had become an unstoppable reality, and as the Americans refined their tactics, shifting from altitude and precision to darkness and fire, the true test of Japan's air defenses was about to begin. The human angle. Life aboard the Superfortress. For the men who flew the B-29, every mission was a test of endurance, of machine, mind, and will. 15 hours sealed in a pressurized cylinder, suspended between heaven and death. Inside, the air was dry and metallic. The vibration never stopped, a deep, constant hum that rattled through bones and oxygen masks. Crews operated in heavy flight suits, surrounded by the smell of heated metal, hydraulic fluid, and coffee from tin flasks that never stayed warm for long. Each bomber carried 11 men: pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, flight engineer, navigator, radio operator, radar operator, and gunners stationed fore and aft. Every man depended on the others completely. If one system failed, if one decision was late, the entire aircraft could be lost. At high altitude, the temperature outside dropped to 40 degrees Celsius. Frost coated the windows. Oxygen hissed steadily from hoses. Even breathing required discipline. Slow, deliberate, rhythmic. Any rupture in the pressurization could mean instant decompression. And yet, In that cold vacuum of sky, there was camaraderie. They named their aircraft with defiant humor: Enola Gay, Dauntless Dotty, Fifi's Revenge. Nose art became ritual, a touch of humanity painted onto aluminum. The missions from the Marianas began before dawn. Crews awoke in rows of tents, the smell of diesel and dust filling the airfields. Briefings were terse: altitude, route, targets, expected winds. They studied photos of Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka, names that soon became synonymous with flame. Once airborne, they ascended into thin air, hour after hour of ocean below. Radio chatter was sparse. Pilots concentrated on fuel balance and formation spacing. When turbulence hit, the massive aircraft flexed, creaking like a living thing. Then, at the coast of Honshu, the adrenaline returned. Searchlights, tracer fire, and flak erupted below. Shells burst into black puffs at their altitude, shaking the bomber. A single hit could ignite an engine or blow open the pressure hull. When the bombs fell, they never saw the explosions directly. Only faint glows far below. A city flickering in miniature. Many crews admitted later they didn't understand the true scale of the destruction until after the war. From their altitude, it all looked abstract, like sparks in the dark. But those sparks would soon grow into oceans of fire. The strategic angle. Curtis LeMay's transformation of the air war by early 1945, the high-altitude raids had proven ineffective. Jet stream winds scattered bombs miles off target, and precision attacks achieved little against Japan's dispersed war industry. General Curtis E. LeMay, who had commanded B-17s in Europe, arrived to fix what he called the world's most expensive failure. LeMay was pragmatic, ruthless, and utterly focused on results. He concluded that the B-29's technological advantages, speed, altitude, and defensive firepower, were meaningless against nature's own forces. The solution, he decided, was to fly lower. He ordered his crews to strip the bombers of guns and armor to reduce weight. Then he redefined their mission. No more pinpoint raids. No more altitude. Instead, mass incendiary bombing. Low, at night, with napalm and magnesium against Japan's wooden cities. It was a calculated, brutal logic. Tokyo's urban core was built almost entirely from wood and paper. Houses stood tightly packed, their narrow lanes perfect for fire propagation. LeMay's planners studied wind patterns, humidity, and fuel loads with mathematical precision. The aim was no longer industrial paralysis. It was combustion. On March 9, 1945, LeMay's strategy was put to the test. The target: Tokyo's industrial and residential heart. The method: 334 B-29s, flying at just 5,000 to 9,000 feet, low enough to see the fires they created. Each aircraft carried clusters of M69 incendiaries, cylinders filled with jellied gasoline, timed to burst and spread fire over wide areas. The bombers flew without formation lights, guided by radar and the glow of the city below. This was not warfare in the conventional sense. It was industrialized destruction. Many American airmen felt conflicted. They had been trained for precision, for rail yards, docks, and factories. Now they were burning neighborhoods. LeMay was blunt. You kill people to stop the killing. The results were beyond anyone's expectation. Within 3 hours, 16 square miles of Tokyo were obliterated. Temperatures reached 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind-driven firestorms merged into cyclones, sucking oxygen from entire districts. Tens of thousands suffocated or burned alive. The raid's success stunned both sides. U.S. headquarters calculated the destruction with grim satisfaction. Japan's command realized, finally, that their defensive network was powerless against this new mode of attack. It was a turning point, the moment when Japan's confidence dissolved into fear, and the superfortress became a symbol of unstoppable retribution. What began as a strategic experiment was about to escalate into a campaign of annihilation, one city after another, until only ash remained. Tokyo, March 9th, 1945, just after 10 p.m. Engines begin to thunder across the blacked-out runways of Guam, Saipan, and Tinian. One by one, the B-29s rise into the humid night, their exhaust flames flickering like orange comets over the Pacific. Inside each aircraft, tension is absolute. The men know this is not another high-altitude precision strike. They have stripped away most of their guns. Their altimeters are set for just 7,000 feet, low enough to feel the heat from the fires they will unleash. The mission codename is Operation Meeting House. Their destination, Tokyo's industrial district, the beating heart of Japan's war production, surrounded by neighborhoods of wooden homes and narrow lanes. At 11:50 p.m., radar operators aboard the lead bomber confirm they've found the target. A green flare drops from the sky, marking the first aim point. Seconds later, a red one follows, the signal to begin the bombing run. Then the sky opens. Clusters of M69 incendiaries rain down like glowing seeds. Each one, no larger than a milk bottle, bursts on impact, spreading flaming, jellied gasoline that clings to everything it touches. Within minutes, entire blocks ignite. The fires merge, feeding on oxygen, timber, and tar paper roofs. The second wave arrives, then the third. Hundreds of superfortresses circled the city in overlapping runs, each dropping tons of incendiaries into the inferno below. From above, the crews see a spectacle unlike anything in the history of warfare. Lines of fire trace through the grid of Tokyo's streets, converging and twisting into tornadoes of flame. Smoke columns rise 20,000 feet into the air, so dense that pilots lose visibility. Some crews report the updrafts are so powerful they toss their aircraft thousands of feet upward, shaking them like paper kites. Down below, Tokyo is unrecognizable. The Shitamachi district, once home to 750,000 people, becomes a furnace. Wooden homes explode as their paper walls ignite. Asphalt streets liquefy under the heat. People run toward the canals, only to find them boiling. Winds roar through the city at hurricane force, fueled by the vacuum created by the firestorm. Flames leap from building to building faster than anyone can run. Entire families huddle in air raid shelters that turn into ovens within minutes. Fire brigades are helpless. Water pressure collapses as pipes melt. Engines seize as fuel tanks ignite. The oxygen itself disappears. The few who survive describe the sound, not of bombs, but of air being consumed, a deep, endless roar that drowns out all else. From his command post, General Curtis LeMay monitors the reports in grim silence. He knows this is working. The numbers are beyond anything even he anticipated. Tokyo is burning uncontrollably. The B-29s circle for hours, bombing until their fuel runs low. Some are damaged by their own shockwaves, their aluminum skins scorched by the heat rising from the city. Others never return, vanishing into the smoke or ditching in the Pacific. By dawn, the raid is over. The first light reveals what remains of Japan's capital, or rather, what does not over 16 square miles of Tokyo have been erased. More than 100,000 people are dead, burned, suffocated, or drowned in canals filled with ash. Another 1 million are homeless. It is the single deadliest air raid of World War II, worse than Dresden, worse than Hamburg, worse than any single night in human history. When Japanese fire crews finally re-enter the ruins, they find entire districts leveled to ground level. Streets are lined with bodies. Many are reduced to outlines, white shapes where people once lay, the heat having vaporized everything but their shadow. At Imperial headquarters, shock ripples through the staff. Reports are fragmented, chaotic. Telephone lines are down. Whole civil defense networks have vanished. The scale of destruction is incomprehensible, and yet, even in that moment, denial lingers. Some officers claim the Americans will not repeat such an operation. Others insist Tokyo's size makes it impossible to destroy entirely. But the photographs taken the next day tell the truth. Daijito, capital of the Japanese Empire. The city of the emperor himself has been reduced to charcoal, and in Washington, the operation is declared an overwhelming success. General Arnold cables LeMay with approval. You have turned the tide of air warfare. The message is clear. The firestorm will not stop with Tokyo. From this moment, Japan's fate is sealed. The B-29's mission will expand to Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, and every industrial city still standing. The fire that began over Tokyo will soon sweep across an entire nation. In the weeks after Tokyo, the sound of the Superfortress becomes a harbinger of death across Japan. The raids continue, not sporadically, but relentlessly. March 11th, Nagoya, March 13, Osaka, March 16, Kobe. Each city burns in turn. What began as a single experimental strike becomes a systematic campaign. An industrial purge from the sky. The B-29s now fly low and unopposed. Japan's air defenses, once feared, are collapsing. Radar stations are crippled, fuel is scarce, and the once formidable Zero fighters are reduced to desperate interceptions, often without enough gasoline to return to base. For the first time since the start of the war, American air power holds total control over the skies of Japan. From Saipan, Guam, and Tinian, the airfields operate day and night, assembly lines of destruction. Mechanics swarm over aircraft, loading incendiaries with mechanical precision. Ground crews, bleary-eyed and coated in oil, push through exhaustion. They know what their efforts mean. Every night, a new city dies. By mid-April, General Curtis LeMay has perfected a methodical rhythm. Stripped-down B-29s, carrying maximum incendiary payloads. Staggered takeoffs to maintain constant waves. Low-altitude flight to maximize coverage and avoid jet stream drift. The result? Firestorms that no firefighting force on Earth can contain. Nagoya burns for 2 straight nights. The aircraft plant producing the famed Mitsubishi Zero is leveled. In Osaka, more than 4,000 tons of incendiaries consume the urban center. Flames rise so high that crews 100 miles away can see the reflection glowing on their cockpit glass. In Kobe, the waterfront, once Japan's proud industrial hub, turns into molten steel and blackened ships. By June, half of Japan's major cities lie in ruins. The raids have destroyed over 40% of the nation's urban area. Yet LeMay is unsatisfied. His target is not just destruction, but paralysis, the total collapse of Japan's will and ability to wage war. When Japanese workers fail to appear at their factories, when entire neighborhoods vanish, when rice warehouses burn, Japan's war machine begins to starve. The imperial government knows it. Reports reaching the emperor's palace describe cities erased overnight, fires that move faster than wind, and millions displaced. Still, surrender remains forbidden. For Japan's leadership, to yield would mean dishonor beyond measure, and so, as American B-29s erase one city after another, Tokyo's generals cling to the belief that Japan can still negotiate from strength, that somehow, even amid ashes, the emperor's divine nation can endure. Meanwhile, In Washington and New Mexico, another project nears completion, one that will redefine warfare entirely. The Manhattan Project has produced its first atomic device. To the men planning Japan's destruction, the atomic bomb and the B-29 are parts of the same instrument. The bomb alone cannot win the war. It needs a delivery system capable of carrying it to the enemy's heart. The B-29 is that weapon. By July 1945, select bombers are modified under a new unit, the 509th Composite Group, commanded by Colonel Paul Tibbets. Their aircraft are stripped of armor, tuned for range, and fitted with special bays to hold the new weapon. The target list is drawn: Hiroshima, Kokura, Niigata, Nagasaki. But before the atom's fire would fall, LeMay's conventional campaign continued. Every night, Japanese civilians learned to read the sound of the sky, the distant drone that meant death was coming. Children were evacuated to the countryside. Entire cities practiced blackout drills, but nothing could stop the fires. American crews began to notice the eerie quiet on their missions. No searchlights, no anti-aircraft bursts, no interceptors. Only empty skies over blackened ruins. A crewman aboard a B-29 over Yokohama recalled, "You could see the glow from hundreds of miles away. It was like looking into the mouth of the world." Even among the airmen, pride was mixed with horror. Some had flown missions over Europe. None had seen destruction on this scale. Navigator Raymond C. Bailey later said, "We weren't bombing targets anymore. We were erasing maps." By late July, Japan was a nation in collapse. Rail networks shattered, industry paralyzed, food supplies dwindling, millions homeless. Yet the war continued. On July 26th, the Allies issued the Potsdam Declaration, demanding Japan's unconditional surrender. The Japanese government ignored it. They did not yet understand what was coming. On the morning of August 6, 1945, a single B-29, the Enola Gay, lifted off from Tinian Island at 2:45 a.m. Its payload, a 9,700-pound uranium bomb, codenamed Little Boy. At 8:15 a.m., Hiroshima vanished. The flash was seen for miles, brighter than the sun. A fireball 1 mile wide erupted over the city, incinerating 80,000 people in seconds. Tens of thousands more would die in the days to follow. 3 days later, another B-29, Boxcar, dropped Fat Man over Nagasaki. By August 15th, Emperor Hirohito's voice was heard over the radio, surrendering for the first time in Japanese history. When the war ended, more than 67 Japanese cities had been bombed by B-29s over. 330,000 civilians were dead. Millions were left homeless, and the weapon Japan once dismissed as impossible, the American Superfortress, had reduced an empire to ruins The victors surveyed the devastation. One truth became clear. The B-29 was not just an aircraft, it was the machine that brought total war to its ultimate form and forced the world into the atomic age. Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, did not end with a thunderous victory parade or a triumphant invasion. It ended in silence. A silence that stretched across an empire reduced to ash. When American occupation forces arrived, what they found defied comprehension. Entire cities, Tokyo, Osaka, Yokohama, Nagoya, were nothing but endless plains of blackened rubble. Where once stood wooden homes, shrines, and workshops, now only chimneys and stone foundations remained. Survey teams sent by the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey recorded the destruction in detail. In Tokyo alone, more than 105,000 people were killed in a single night, the deadliest air raid in human history. Across Japan, nearly 2.5 million homes were destroyed, leaving over 8 million people homeless. For the Japanese people, the end of the war brought both relief and humiliation. The once proud cities of the empire had been erased not by invasion, but by fire. The invincible spirit of Bushido, the centuries-old belief in martial honor, had met a machine that fought with no emotion. No sword, no duel, no face-to-face. Only a steady hum from the sky. And at the center of this devastation stood one aircraft, the Boeing B-29 Superfortress. As the Allied occupation began, American engineers and scientists moved swiftly to evaluate the results of their creation. The B-29 had been the most advanced bomber of its time, a symbol of American industrial might and technological mastery. Its pressurized cabin, remote-controlled gun turrets, and long-range engines represented a leap years ahead of anything fielded by the Axis. In the final months of the war, it had flown from island airstrips in the Pacific to the heart of Japan, missions covering over 3,000 miles round trip, at altitudes few Japanese interceptors could reach. The statistics were staggering. From November 1944 to August 1945, the U.S. 20th Air Force dropped over 160,000 tons of bombs on Japan, 50% incendiary, 30% high explosive, and 20% mines and other munitions. By the end, B-29s had destroyed more than 60% of Japan's urban area. It was the most concentrated aerial devastation in human history, even greater than that unleashed on Germany. Furi Fin, Japan's military leadership. The shock was total. Post-war interrogations revealed how deeply they had underestimated the aircraft. Many Japanese air officers confessed they had believed such a bomber was beyond possibility. Their own attempts to counter it had failed. From the start, radar coverage was fragmented. Fighter aircraft lacked range and altitude performance. Anti-aircraft guns were few and outdated by the time they adapted, switching to night defense and balloon barrage networks. The fires had already consumed their cities. In a report prepared after the war, one Japanese general admitted, "The B-29 was the greatest single factor in the collapse of our ability to fight." Yet, the devastation was not limited to Japan alone. The Superfortress had also transformed the psychology of warfare. It demonstrated that a nation could be brought to surrender not through invasion, but through the systematic destruction of its capacity to sustain life, through air power alone. For the United States, this was a revelation. The B-29 had validated the strategic bombing doctrine long debated by military theorists, the idea that air dominance could decide wars independently of ground combat. The lessons would shape every future conflict, from Korea to Vietnam and beyond. But as the ashes settled, not everyone felt victory. American crews returning home carried memories they would never forget. The orange glow beneath their wings, the black smoke rising into the stratosphere, and the thought of hundreds of thousands of lives lost far below. Many struggled to reconcile their mission with the scale of the suffering it caused. Some called it necessary, others called it unimaginable. One pilot later said, "We thought we were shortening the war, but when I saw Tokyo burn, I realized we had entered something darker than victory. And yet, that darkness had brought an end to the most destructive conflict in human history. Out of it emerged a new world, one built on both power and fear. From the ashes of the firestorms rose not just peace, but the shadow of what was to come." In the immediate years following Japan's surrender, the B-29 Superfortress became more than a weapon. It became a symbol, a machine that had ended a world war, and in doing so had defined the beginning of a new one. The atomic bomb missions of August 1945, had demonstrated not only the destructive power of nuclear energy, but also the unmatched reach of American air technology. The B-29 was the vessel that delivered that revelation. At airfields across the Pacific, the remaining bombers stood in long, silent rows, gleaming giants of aluminum and carbon steel. For many, they were relics of an age that had already transformed. For others, they were the foundation of what came next, the dawn of the Cold War. In 1946, the U.S. Army Air Forces became the United States Air Force, an independent branch built on the very principles the B-29 had proven. That strategic bombing, long-range strike capability, and technological superiority could determine global power. The B-29 was succeeded by newer aircraft, the B-50, B-36 Peacemaker, and eventually the B-52 Superfortress, each carrying the DNA of Boeing's wartime masterpiece. The innovations pioneered in the Superfortress, pressurization, centralized fire control, advanced aerodynamics, became the blueprint for post-war aviation, both military and civilian. Commercial airliners adopted its technology. Jet bombers evolved from its frame. The bomber that had once been designed to burn cities now laid the groundwork for a future of global flight. For Japan, the B-29 left a different kind of legacy. Its destruction forced the nation into an unprecedented transformation. From empire to democracy, from military power to industrial titan. In the post-war years, as American occupation rebuilt Japan's shattered infrastructure, factories once devoted to war production began manufacturing for peace. Ironically, some of those same facilities that had once been targets of the B-29's bombs would later supply parts for Boeing's next generation of aircraft. Out of the ruins of war, the two nations became allies. Their partnership a cornerstone of the modern Pacific world, but the shadow of the B-29's firestorms never disappeared for those who survived the bombings in Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, Hiroshima, Nagasaki. Memory itself became an open wound. Cities rebuilt, but trauma remained. Each spring, survivors gathered to remember the nights when the sky burned and the earth melted beneath them. In Hiroshima and Nagasaki, peace memorials rose from the ashes, stark reminders of what happens when technology outpaces humanity. Even today, among historians and moral philosophers, the debate endures. Was the firebombing of Japan a necessary step toward ending the war? Or an act that crossed a line humanity should never again approach? General LeMay, who directed the campaign, later said bluntly, "If we'd lost the war, we'd have been tried as war criminals." His words echoed the paradox of total war, that in pursuit of peace, nations had unleashed destruction beyond comprehension. In the years that followed, many B-29s were scrapped, melted down, or left to decay on forgotten airfields. A few survived, restored by museums or preserved on display. Among them, one stands above all others, the Enola Gay, the aircraft that dropped the first atomic bomb. Today, it rests in the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, polished, suspended in silence, frozen in time. Visitors walk beneath its immense silver fuselage, often in quiet disbelief. To some, it is a marvel of engineering. To others, it is a monument to humanity's capacity for devastation. Yet for all its weight in history, the B-29 also represents something deeper. The moment when the boundaries of war, science, and morality collided. It was the machine that turned the 20th century toward the atomic age, that reshaped how nations thought about power, fear, and survival. When it left the skies over Japan, the world it returned to would never be the same. The era of industrial warfare had ended. The era of annihilation had begun. The story of the B-29 Superfortress, is not merely about a machine, it is about what humanity became capable of and what it chose to do with that power. When the Superfortress first took flight, it represented progress, the pinnacle of engineering, courage, and ingenuity. By the time its engines fell silent, it had redefined the very meaning of war. From 30,000 feet, it had proven that distance no longer meant safety. Cities, once protected by oceans and geography, could now be reached in hours, and with that realization, the illusion of isolation for any nation vanished forever. The B-29 did what no army, no navy had done before. It brought a nation to its knees through the sky, alone. It turned industrial might into a weapon of psychological and physical annihilation. But behind its brilliance lay a truth history cannot escape, that every innovation in warfare carries a shadow. The same hands that designed its engines would later build the wings of passenger planes. The same science that gave birth to the bomb would power cities, hospitals, and homes. The B-29's legacy, therefore, is not just one of destruction. It is a mirror. It reflects both the heights of human invention and the depths of human consequence. As decades pass and the veterans fade, its silver wings still glint under museum lights, silent reminders of a night when fire rained from the heavens, when technology outpaced conscience, and when the world crossed an invisible threshold it could never return from. Tapio 29 ended a war, but it also began an era, an age in which the Idadihi power to destroy the world became inseparable from the duty to preserve it, and that is the enduring paradox of the Superfortress. It was not simply the weapon that broke an empire, it was the warning that defined the modern world.